It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The alleged Chinese agent and proximity to power. His identity now revealed, with consequences for the prince who appeared his sponsor. Yang Tengbo says the claims against him come because of an anti-China stance, but those who knew him may now be counting the cost. Also tonight, Syria's deposed president says he never considered stepping down. As we meet the supporters he left behind, now worried about retaliation. The search for survivors in the aftermath of a tropical cyclone, with a warning that hundreds, even thousands, could be dead in a French overseas territory. Why Lucy Letby's lawyers want judges to reopen her appeal, claiming a key expert witness has changed his mind over the deaths of 3 babies. The Battle of Britain at next year's European Championships, as England's Lionesses are grouped with Wales's Dragons. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. The identity of the alleged Chinese spy who won patronage from a prince and met prime ministers was revealed today. Yang Tengbo said he had asked for his anonymity to be lifted and that he had done nothing wrong or unlawful. Sir Keir Starmer said today he is concerned about the challenge that China poses, but that his approach is one of engagement. Well, previously known by the pseudonym H6, Yang Tengbo first moved to the UK more than 20 years ago. Also known as Christopher Yang, he is a director of a business consultancy which says it acts as a bridge between China and the rest of the world. One of his roles was as founder partner of Pitch Palace China, part of his contact with Prince Andrew. The King's brother won't now be attending Christmas with the rest of his family, our royal correspondent was told today, and we'll hear more from Rhiannon Mills in a moment. But first, our home editor, Jason Farrell, has this report.
Yang Tengbo is the alleged Chinese spy who befriended a prince, whilst being linked to an organisation whose aims are to disrupt the UK. His relationship with the Duke of York, on the face of it, promoted British and Chinese companies, but was described as having a covert and clandestine element, with Mr. Yang accused of engaging in deceptive activity for the Chinese Communist Party.
It's clear that Prince Andrew has, unbeknownst to himself perhaps, been a risk to our national security. And naming H6 will send a shudder down many people's spine, the people who are in our elite, who are at the heart of our government.
That's because Mr. Yang appeared to have penetrated the British establishment, meeting Prime Ministers Theresa May and David Cameron while running his consultancy called Hampton Group International. Here on China Central Television, he says he met Mr. Cameron at a Chinese New Year reception at number 10. Amid threats to name him in Parliament, Mr. Yang asked for the restrictions on his identity to be lifted, insisting he's not a spy, but a legitimate businessman. But MPs say he's one of many agents with an ulterior motive.
Yang Tengbo at H6 was in fact not a lone wolf. He was one of some 40,000 members of the United Works Department, which the Intelligence Security Committee report last year said, and I quote, "and known to government, had penetrated every sector of the UK economy, spying, stealing intellectual property, influencing and shaping our institutions."
Mr. Yang was born in China in 1974. In 2002, he came to the UK to study, including at the University of York. In 2013, he was granted indefinite leave to remain. And through his consultancy connections, by 2020, he was attending Prince Andrew's 60th birthday party. But in November 2021, he was stopped at a port under counter-terrorism laws and asked to hand over digital devices. As a result of that, in March 2023, the Home Secretary directed he should be excluded from the UK on national security grounds. Evidence on his devices revealed his strong links, both with the Communist Party and with the Duke of York.
Where individuals pose a threat, as you would expect, the UK government is absolutely committed to using the full range of powers available to disrupt them. I raised these issues when I was in Beijing a few weeks ago. This case does not exist, sadly, in a vacuum. The UK is in the most complex threat environment that we've seen for a very significant time.
While Mr Yang has their pictures on his desk, both David Cameron and Theresa May say they don't know him and they've met thousands of people at numerous functions. But for Prince Andrew, whose aide told Mr Yang he was at the very top of the tree among his close confidants, this is harder to shake off. The Duke says nothing sensitive was discussed and he ceased contact when concerns were raised. But, disgraced again, he won't be attending Sandringham this Christmas. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
So questions tonight at the highest levels of politics and the monarchy. I'll speak shortly to our chief political correspondent, John Craig, outside Parliament. First, though, our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, is at Buckingham Palace tonight. Rhiannon, it's now clear that Prince Andrew was just one of many prominent people who spent time with Yang Tongbo. Is there any sense from those around him that he feels that he's being treated as a scapegoat over this?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I suspect that Prince Andrew and his team will say, look at those within the political establishment who also spent time with the Chinese businessman. He certainly wasn't the only one. But the problem is, for Prince Andrew, there is still such a fascination in him and his downfall within the royal family. I think it's only ramped up interest in this story even further. And that means we are fascinated, aren't we, to see pictures and video of him spending time with that man. We can, of course, show you that tonight. For the royal family, of course, it is a problem. One issue that Prince Andrew has solved for them is he's decided that he's not going to go to Sandringham for Christmas, and nor is his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson. And that is a big deal because usually it's the one moment in the year where we see him alongside the family. We see that he is still part of the family fold. One big question, though, is about a party that's going to be here at Buckingham Palace on Thursday. It's the kind of traditional royal family lunch. We don't know whether Prince Andrew is going to go. For Palace insiders, they say it is a big problem. Yes, it might be a lunch he'd normally be invited to, but as one person said to me, it's not just what's happening, it's how it looks. And actually the optics of him driving through the gates of what is seen as Monarchy HQ would not be good at the moment. How much the King involved in these kind of discussions, it's really hard to find out. I'm told by one person there is still this warm brotherly bond between them. I think there will be a sense of relief that Prince Andrew will be out of sight on Christmas Day, but he certainly will not be out of mind for all of those who still think there are big questions about his business contacts and how over the years he's used his position and his title.
This put a brake on Sir Keir Starmer's stated policy, expressed again today, of engagement with China.
Well, in the Commons today, the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, faced questions for up to an hour, really. And during those questions, indeed, Sir Keir Starmer's meeting with President Xi at a G20 summit in Rio was challenged by the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. He accused the Prime Minister of taking a sycophantic tone with the Chinese President. And from Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, we heard accusations that the government was turning a blind eye to human rights abuses by China. Mr. Jarvis said that this case does not exist in a vacuum. He said 6 individuals had been charged under the latest Anti-Terror Act, the Nationality Act already. Sir Ian, who was asking an urgent question, also claimed to me later on, after the exchanges in the Commons, that there was something of a U-turn coming from the government, bringing in a registration scheme first planned by the Tories but not implemented. Sir Ian said that they really need to get on with that, do it much more quickly. And it was Suella Braverman who stood up in the House and said she was the Home Secretary who excluded Mr. Yang back in 2023. So this row will continue. The government is being accused of being too cosy with the Chinese. And yet, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, when I spoke to him tonight, blamed Mr. Cameron, Lord Cameron and George Osborne for getting too cosy with the Chinese. And of course, that meant that some security concerns, national security, had been overlooked in some cases.
Rhiannon and John, thank you. President Assad broke his silence today over the end of his rule in Syria. The country's former leader insisted that, despite appearances, he had not considered stepping down or seeking refuge as rebels advanced on Syria's capital. Bashar al-Assad is a member of the country's minority Alawite community, and people from that community have told Sky News they're scared about possible retribution, as our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey now reports.
A busy Russian airbase on Syria's Mediterranean coast, the main logistics hub for Russia's military and vitally its air link to Moscow. It's now emerged that it's from here that Bashar al-Assad made his escape from Syria as his army collapsed and the rebels rolled into Damascus. He flew to Moscow on the advice of Russia, he says in a statement, because the base was coming under attack. The fact is, he was cornered. In the statement, his first since he was overthrown, he says, "At no point during these events did I consider stepping down or seeking refuge. The only course of action was to continue fighting against the terrorist onslaught." Rebels are now outside the airport that shares the base runway. They were that near to him, although a Russian helicopter gunship we filmed patrolling the skies would almost certainly have guaranteed his safety while he was spirited away. A few minutes away from the base, HTS soldiers man a checkpoint to the city of Jabla. Assad knew it well. It was an Alawite city, a minority group from which the Assad family descended. It's ironic, he flew over the very people who now feel threatened by their links to the Assad regime. For over 50 years, the Assad's senior military officers and advisors were Alawites. The Alawites are not popular in today's Syria, and they know it. In a suburb community, we were asked to speak to their local leaders. We were surrounded, everyone wanting to talk. Put bluntly, they're plain scared. So ultimately you want to have law and order guaranteed, acknowledgement of your own rights being a minority.
انتم بكون قانون وعدل يكونوا مضمونين
ايوه
ضمان حقوق الاقليات
ضمان حقوق الاقليات.
We want to the rights of the minorities to be secured.
What are women worried about?
شو المخاوف اللي عند النساء هلا؟
المخاوف انه ما يكون في عندنا امان انه يصير في عندنا طائفيه فقط.
We're afraid about losing security and having sectarianism.
في انه ايام المجرم كان يعيشنا انه هون
During the era of the criminal, we used to live in a classist way. We want to live in security. That's everything we want. This is the most important thing, and from there we can solve everything. We just want security and health.
In the centre of town, HTS patrols seem remarkably out of place, more like an occupying force. The local community say they want to be included in any new Syria. What they are saying to us is that if their human rights are respected in the same way as every other community, then they're quite happy that there's a change in leadership. For the new government, if they want to make this new freedom a success, they'll have to acknowledge and protect all the minority communities in Syria. Assad's flight to Moscow gives them the opportunity. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Jabla.
The main Indian Ocean island of Mayotte is only the size of the Isle of Wight, but home to more than 300,000 people, many living in poverty. Tonight, rescuers from France, of which it is an overseas territory, are on the island searching for survivors from the worst cyclone to hit in nearly 100 years. Hundreds or even thousands are feared dead after Cyclone Chido struck. And there are worries too about the situation in northern Mozambique, where the storm made landfall in Africa. Our Africa correspondent Yusra El-Bahir has more.
Much of this small island is now unrecognizable. The French military deployed to Mayotte survey what's left. Trees strewn across roads, cars abandoned, homes reduced to rubble. The human toll is still unclear, but likely catastrophic. Cyclone Chido's fury was unrelenting. The strongest storm to hit the French islands of Mayotte in nearly a century. Many of the neighborhoods, made up of shacks and huts, barely stood a chance. Entire communities now flattened. The French Interior Minister arrived to assess the devastation in the Overseas Department, governed from Paris.
If we want things to work well, we're going to pull out all the stops. We will mobilize everything we can mobilize, in terms of civilian means and in terms of military means.
Chido has also wrought havoc on neighboring Mozambique. Aid agencies fear up to 2 million will be affected here. And those effects will be long-term. Children cut off from access to education and a heightened risk to life from waterborne diseases. Fears now for those already displaced by conflict in a country racked by instability.
When you're displaced, you don't have your own house and you cannot shelter well. So many people are just in huts, and those have just been destroyed. And you can see that also in Pemba town here, where you have close to 80,000 people displaced. We were out driving here on Sunday afternoon, assessing the situation. We can see that they are just flattened, the houses.
In Mayotte, what was already France's poorest region, now adjusting to even less. The future of the residents of this island, now desperately uncertain. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
Well, the intensity of Cyclone Chido raises inevitable questions about the role of climate change. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has been reviewing satellite and ocean temperature data to get a clearer picture.
The track of Cyclone Chido over the Indian Ocean sent it directly across the tiny islands of Mayotte. As well as catastrophic winds of more than 130 miles an hour, it brought intense rain, shown by these bands, with over 25 centimetres causing flash flooding and landslides too. Seen from space, you can see how Mayotte took the full force of the compact storm with no large landmass to dissipate it, which is only now happening as the cyclone meets the African continent. It's the worst storm in 90 years to hit the islands, a tiny French territory north of Madagascar. 3/4 of the population, more than 300,000, live in relative poverty, many in informal settlements, squeezed onto an island the same size as the Isle of Wight. Mayotte is essentially a case study of the risk posed by storms as our planet warms. Tropical cyclone is an umbrella term. In the Atlantic and East Pacific, they're called hurricanes. In the Northwest Pacific, typhoons. Everywhere else, including the Indian Ocean, tropical cyclones. Storm tracks shown here, going back to Victorian times, show they're a regular natural phenomenon. The most powerful Category 5 storms, here in purple, occur most often as super typhoons in Asia. But the physics of climate change apply to all of them. Average ocean temperatures have been trending upwards for years, with a notable jump in the last two. Storms don't appear to be getting more frequent, but extra heat can increase wind speeds and warm air carries more rain.
We can expect more intense storms as a result, and islands really are the most vulnerable to these storms, because even if we have a forecast in advance that storm is going to make landfall in that island, people need to have somewhere safe to go to, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure is resilient so that we have the power supply and the water supply and the communications that are not impacted by that storm, so the community can bounce back quickly.
Cyclones will remain random, even with climate change, and islands like Mayotte are small targets. But when chance sends a storm their way, the odds are increasingly stacked against them, unless they're equipped, like larger, richer places, to adapt.
Those who question the guilt of the serial killer nurse Lucy Letby have always queried some of the expert evidence given at her original trial. Today, her legal team said that one of the most important expert witnesses has changed his view on 3 of the deaths, and on that basis, judges should reopen her appeal. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, reports.
The crimes of Lucy Letby marked her out as the most prolific serial killer in modern British history. But just as unusual is the loyal band of supporters who doubt those very convictions. Among them, her new legal team, who want judges to reopen her appeal, citing interviews in which the lead prosecution witness at her trial, Dr. Dowie Evans, said he'd revised his opinion on how some babies collapsed, if not on who was responsible.
This is not fresh evidence. This is the lead prosecution expert who has changed his mind, and the Court of Appeal may not have been told the accurate picture as a result.
Letby's serving life in prison for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 7 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital. The families of the babies she attacked have in the past described discussions about her guilt as distressing and offensive. And police are still investigating the care of other babies Lucy Letby came into contact with during her career here and at Liverpool Women's Hospital. We know she's been questioned under caution in prison.
Page 24.
A public inquiry is looking at how Letby was able to kill, not whether she did. The consultant who first tried to raise the alarm about her said he believes she attacked more babies.
On reflection, I think it's likely that Letby didn't start becoming a killer in June 2015 or didn't start harming babies in June 15.
In a statement, the Crown Prosecution Service said 2 juries and 3 appeal court judges have reviewed a multitude of different strands of evidence against Lucy Letby. She's been convicted on 15 separate counts following 2 separate jury trials. In May, the Court of Appeal dismissed Letby's leave to appeal on all grounds, rejecting her argument that expert prosecution evidence was flawed. Letby's lawyers accept it would be unusual for the court to reopen her appeal, but we already know the Lucy Letby story is unprecedented in so many ways. Greg Milam, Sky News, Chester.
A teacher and teenage student were shot dead tonight at an American school. 2 more people have life-threatening injuries. The attack happened at a Christian school in the state of Wisconsin. Our US correspondent Mark Stone has more.
It was just before 11 a.m. when the first calls came in.
A shooter is advising someone was shot.
Initially, confusion.
I'm hearing multiple things, possibly 1 deceased, maybe 6 people injured, at least 2 shot.
But quickly, some clarity.
Copy. Let's make this an active shooter incident.
A shooting at a school on the edge of Madison, and confirmation that the gunman was dead.
Shooter is down.
And then the grim routine that feels in this country to be so tragically familiar. An officer updating the media with the latest.
When officers arrived, they found multiple victims suffering from gunshot wounds. Officers located a juvenile who they believe was responsible for this deceased in the building.
And revealing how often they are forced to train for this.
We train on this almost quarterly. The last time we trained on this as commanders was approximately 2 weeks ago.
The eyewitnesses with reflections that could be from any one of this country's mass shootings.
We saw a few guys with long guns. They went in the school with a dog. And then a little later on, I saw groups of kids coming out of the school.
And the parents forced to wonder if their children were among the dead or injured.
My sister called me on the phone. She's like, there is an active shooter at the school. She had like an inside source kind of tell her. And I just bolted out. I drove down here, I called my husband, and he made his way over here.
The Abundant Life Christian School is private for kindergarten up to 12th grade. It's thought the gunman was one of the students, now dead, along with 2 others at the school, a teacher and a teenager. 9 people were injured, some seriously. Now, the questions for investigators. What was the motive? How was the weapon acquired? There have been nearly 500 mass shootings in America this year. 1,347 children under 18 have died in 2024 from gunshot wounds. Now, yet another American community is reeling. Mark Stone, Sky News.
A 12-year-old girl has been granted bail after appearing in court charged with the manslaughter of pensioner Bim Coley. The 80-year-old was allegedly attacked while walking his dog not far from his home near Leicester in September. A 15-year-old boy, earlier charged with murder, is due in court later this week. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has lost a confidence vote in Parliament today after the collapse of his 3-party coalition last month. He fell well short of the votes needed to survive before major party leaders agreed to hold an early election in February next year. Zakir Hussain, the Indian classical music icon who introduced tabla to global audiences, has died at the age of 73. He'd been suffering from a form of chronic lung disease. His career spanned 6 decades and included collaborations with the likes of George Harrison and the cellist Yo-Yo Ma. Now, it's not just the Duke of York who is facing questions over his decisions tonight. The city's Archbishop is facing calls for his resignation for not taking action early enough relating to a church sex abuse case. Stephen Cottrell is due to shortly, temporarily, take over from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who is himself standing down over failures relating to a separate sex abuse case. Our North of England correspondent, Shingi Maruike, reports now from York.
This is usually a time of year for the church to celebrate, and at this special Advent service in York Minster, they are in a festive mood.
This wonderful and beautiful celebration of Christmas.
But beyond the joys of the season, Christmas is being marked by what could become a crisis for the Church of England. Because the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, the man due to take on the biggest role in the institution, is facing calls to resign over reports about his handling of sex abuse by a priest who served under him. In a statement today, Cottrell offered an apology and more context, stating, "In my capacity as Bishop of Chelmsford, I suspended David Tudor from office at the first opportunity when a new victim came forward to the police in 2019. Up until 2019, there were no legal grounds to take alternative action. I am deeply sorry that we were not able to take action earlier, but this was the situation I inherited. It is extremely disappointing that this story is being reported as if it was an abuser being ignored or even protected. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth." Matthew says he was a victim of abuse at the hands of a vicar when he was a teenager. He thinks Cottrell must resign.
We shouldn't have to wait for him to resign. He should be removed and take with him all the other bishops and church hierarchy who have caused this safeguarding mess and hurt to so many victims. Abuse could have been stopped.
Within the church, criticism as well. This bishop, its own deputy head of safeguarding, stating much more needs to be done.
If I look at the institution, I can see issues around lack of accountability. I can see systems that don't operate like they would in other organisations. So the way in which clergy are appointed as office holders, not employees, and the laws and rules that we have around imposing clergy discipline are not really fit for purpose.
The calls for Stephen Cottrell to resign aren't just about safeguarding issues in the church. They go beyond it. In a society that is becoming increasingly less religious, this will add to people's criticisms of the church as an institution. But the context matters. A month on from one Archbishop of Canterbury resigning in similar circumstances, pressure is mounting on the man due to take over in just a matter of days. And for some, apologies will not be enough. They'll want to see changes made to an old institution that is meant to be a source of hope and light. Shingi Maruike, Sky News, York.
Well, finally, tonight's Women's Euro 2025 draw has set up a battle of Britain with defending champions England to face debutants Wales in the group stage. The Lionesses and Dragons will join France and the Netherlands in Group D next summer in Switzerland. It will also mean a reunion of sorts for England head coach Sarina Wiegman with her native Dutch side, which she led to European glory back in 2017, before repeating the feat with the Lionesses 2 years ago. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by The Sun's deputy political editor, Ryan Saby, and The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this take on the Duke of York's predicament. On the front of Ryan's paper, the headline, Andrew's stuffed at Christmas. That and more when we come back.